thank you guys for coming. I hope everybody can hear me because I don't speak very loud. My name is David Staney. So I work with emergency services for Stillwater County, and we've got commissioners here as well that are representing the county to come out and get some more information. And of course, they've been on site to see most of it firsthand. So again, thank you guys for coming out. On Saturday, we had the train derailment, and we've been working through that. So we put together a group that it can explain from first response, what actually happened, Montana rail meet, the environmental issues that are associated with that. So DEQ and EPA are all here to run through and give you some good information. And we're going to have a question and answer session after that. I'd just like to say before we start, as part of the response, we have worked really well with all of the agencies, from Columbus Fire, Montana Rail Link, and the federal agencies and DEQ that have come in. So we've got a good working group. Stillwater County is here to support all the mitigation and recovery efforts for Montana Rail Link, because we, Stillwater County, have a vested interest in that. Right? You guys ready? Good. Go. Turn it over to you.
Okay, so I'll start off this evening. My name's Rich Gowder. I'm the fire chief here in Columbus. Just to give you a real brief history about, remember to stay right here, which is going to be a challenge for me. About a real brief history. About a little after 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, we were dispatched to a car in the river at the Twin Bridges. So we went out with a full response, fire and EMS, along with law enforcement. And with a call like that, we automatically notified Dave Stamey's office through DES. On arrival, we did obviously see what you guys have seen in the pictures, right? So our first priority became making sure that the engineers were clear of that incident, making sure we had no life safety issues with that. We did that. Luckily, they were quite a ways away from the incident. And then our next priority went to try to figure out what exactly we had in the river. A little bit of time, because as you can see through the pictures that we've got, the wreckage and everything, you got to kind of figure out through binoculars what exactly those cars are. Ended up that we did have 2 cars of sodium hydrosulfate. Five. Every time I get that wrong. Okay, that were involved in the derailment. And then we had asphalt and sulfur, molten sulfur. The 2 sodium hydrosulfide cars were actually on the west side of the bridge. So one had been derailed, it was down in the embankment, had not been breached. And the other one was on the bridge at about a 45-degree angle and had not been breached. That's a very good thing. Had either of those 2 cars been breached, this public area probably looked significantly different kind of stuff, okay? The asphalt is there, we knew that, and in total there was 10 cars in the river. And some cars on the other side. The 10 cars in the river were 6 asphalt cars, 3 molten sulfur cars, and 1 hopper car that had scrap metal, ground up scrap metal. Okay. So through that process, we knew there was product release. So I think everybody's well aware that there's black asphalt. This is a technical term that we made up, globules floating down the river. Okay. So the properties of that asphalt is, luckily, when it goes, it's heated in the cars. When it goes into a cooler environment, it starts to solidify. And that's how come it's staying in those balls, and or it could be string, but it's staying together. Not water soluble, so it's not going to disperse in the water. So that's a good thing. The folks from DEQ and EPA will tell you that the monitoring that they're doing, we set up monitoring along the river banks and some of the irrigation ditches, or we're going to in some of the irrigation ditches to monitor and make sure what that looks like. But right off the bat, some calls were made to our downstream public water users, so Laurel, Lockwood, Billings, to make sure that their water intakes were closed in case, until we could identify what was coming at them. as well as our irrigation ditches. Okay, so that all happened within the first couple of hours. Montana Rail Link was on scene very shortly, played an integral part in helping to mitigate that stuff and identify that stuff almost immediately. As soon as we could get the manifest from the engineers, we could tell now where those cars are and what we have in the river. Okay, so that's kind of the history of where we're at. Since then, we've formed what is called a unified command. So that unified command has federal, state, local, and private representation in that command post. So from the state, we have Montana DEQ taking the lead in representing the state and the state agencies. Federal EPA is representing the federal side of things and all the federal agencies. Montana Rail Link, of course, is representing themselves as the private company. And then I got nominated to be the representative for the county and the local area because it's in my fire district. And that kind of stuff as well. So the four of us are sitting in that unified command, which means all of us are there when decisions need to be made to express the concerns related to each one of the different levels of representation, which is good for the community, right? Because I'm there, our voice is being heard if it's counter of one of the other agencies. What I will tell you is this, though. We've been working flawlessly in that command with the intent of doing two things. Stopping the flow, because there's still product in the river, there's still tanks there. That's number one priority. Let me rephrase that. Life safety is our number one priority. Then the stoppage of that product from being distributed any further than what it currently is. And we do that by getting those tank cars out of the river. And then three, the cleanup process, okay? What I will tell you is this event, as you well know, will not be over next week. It won't be over next month. It'll probably be a long-term duration for quite some time to go. The folks behind me will help talk about those different operations and the phases that are going on simultaneously, but be confident that there's no conspiracy here. We're being bluntly transparent with everything that's here and what we're up against. People will talk about, well, did we derail or did the bridge fail? We don't know. It's too early to tell. We won't know until all the pieces of the puzzle go back together. You know, why didn't we boom? Well, if you look at the way the river's flowing, you can't boom something across the river the way it is right now. Kind of stuff. So every effort that can be made to mitigate this as quickly as possible being made. And literally there are experts flying in from all over the country on a daily basis, almost hourly, coming in to take a look at what we got going on. What I'll go back to before I turn it over to MRL is that truly keep in mind, you probably could have picked a better substance, which would have been none to have in the river. But asphalt and sulfur congeal, they stay solid, they don't disperse in the water. So with that said, it's not going to affect some of the things that we've seen in the past. We're not going to have oil stains affecting all the vegetation and that kind of stuff. Will still be a cleanup, yes, absolutely, but it's going to look significantly different. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Joe Roscoe, President Montana Rail Link, to talk about some of the latest operations and kind of where we're going from there.
So thank you, everyone. Like Rich said, my name is Joe Roscoe, President of Montana Rail Link. Want to start off by thanking our partners here, our first responders. Rich mentioned the Unified Command. Want to thank DEQ and EPA. They've been tremendously supportive, working in a really collaborative fashion on this. FRA is also on site, Federal Railroad Administration, and also NTSB as well to kind of handle some of the investigative stuff regarding costs. So want to thank everybody there. Also really want to thank the community. This is not an ideal situation for us, certainly less ideal for you guys. And so I appreciate your patience. You're feeding us, you're housing us. People have been incredibly kind to us, which is really appreciative for us. And I just want to let you know, we'll be here. Montana Rail Link will be here until the end. 100% of this is our financial responsibility, and we're going to be here to make it right. So that being said, Rich mentioned some of the operations. So we have three main response contractors on site doing kind of the heavy work. We also have close to 20 total response contractors on the environmental side, from air quality monitoring, water quality monitoring, oil wildlife resources. We have special scat teams that are going to scour the banks looking for pieces of asphalt to collect. So we don't have a shortage of experts on site. We brought in a specialized dive team that specializes in open water diving. When we get to that point, they need to make assessments of what's in the river. We can rely on them. And so this is difficult work. I know it probably feels slow. We'd love to go a lot faster. Like Rich said, there were 17 total cars derailed. Right now, we have 7 of those either re-railed or removed from the river. So we've removed another asphalt tank car today. So the plan going forward is to continue this heavy effort, continue to build that causeway out a little bit further so we can access some of the cars. We'll get the stuff on the east end of the bridge. There's 3 loaded asphalt cars there, get those transloaded and moved out. Then there's a 4th car that you've probably seen in the photos that's kind of a little bit precariously placed. We'll deal with that one as well. So definitely committed to this community, committed to cleaning this up as quickly as we can, and then trying to get the rail line restored. But obviously, first priority is the response effort and making sure that we do the right thing on our side. So with that, on the environmental side, I'll hand it over to Shasta.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Shasta Steinweden with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Just a couple quick things that I'd like to talk with you about. So we have done some assessment of that asphalt material that was released. But like everyone, like Chief said, this product is not water soluble. So it's not dissolving in the water and releasing constituents into the water. We've talked with some toxicologists, gotten some results back. This, from a human health standpoint, this material it's a nuisance. There's no like danger for health. It's just, it's sticky, it's globby, it's gross. You don't want to touch it. So with that, some common sense precautions, try to avoid skin contact. Don't eat the black gooey stuff. Try to keep your dog from eating the black gooey stuff. It's not chocolate. And you probably want to keep your dog away. The last thing I'd want is have my dog rolling in it, jumping in my car, spraying it all over my car and all over my house. So just use your common sense with this. It's really, just try to stay away from it. But our water quality monitoring is continuing daily. Even though we've gotten all these results, we're still double checking all of that. We're still testing the water daily. We've tested some irrigation ditches. We have 10 downstream water sampling locations, and we have now 3 upstream water sampling locations to compare the water above the derailment to the water down below the derailment. So far, we've had no detections of petroleum, so no detections of that asphalt material coming out into the water. We've had none of that. And there are no risks to drinking water wells. This material isn't dissolving. It's going to be really hard to pull a globule of asphalt through the soil to your well. So public water supplies are not in danger with this current situation. However, they are aware of what's going on. If they have any detects or see anything in their sampling, they're prepped and they know what to do. We've been continually air quality monitoring since right after the derailment occurred. We've been doing that on the site. We will continue to do it. We've had no detections. And like we've mentioned before, the state is here for the long haul term of this cleanup. We will be here for a while overseeing this until it's completed. So we're not looking to leave anytime soon. We want to see this through to completion. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Joni for some more.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joni Sandoval with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal On-Scene Coordinator, and I just want to share a little bit about our role here. I'm actually out of the Denver office, but we did fly out the same day. Heard about it at 7 a.m. We were on site by like 3 p.m. that day in an emergency response capacity. And so our role here is we're required under the law and the Clean Water Act to oversee a large response like this. I'm a public servant. It's our responsibility to protect human health and the environment. We also have the authority to take over the incident or cleanup if it wasn't being done correctly. However, that's not going to be the case here because Montana Rail is providing the resources and expertise, and with all the other supporting agencies, it's going very well. And so they're making our job really easy. And so we're really just here in like a support role, and then also to kind of help bring in our federal partners and offer technical expertise and resources wherever we need to. So that's the EPA role in this response and in unified command. There's Shasta talked about some of the environmental stuff, and I'm just going to continue on that. So, we've got some data gaps in this response. We don't know exactly how much product was released. We have a good idea based on like the tanker size and the manifests and things like that, but we've used sort of worst case estimates for trying to project, how far the material went out in the river and things like that. Well, it might not be accurate, right? It might. Today we pulled out, the contractors pulled out asphalt car that appeared to be pretty full still, if not completely full of product. And so that's great, right? Because that means it wasn't released into the river. Not to say that, there wasn't a lot of product released, but as we are pulling the cars, because there's still like 6 cars, in the river at this time, we'll have better ideas of how much material was actually released into the river and what material. So that sulfur versus the asphalt. Another data gap that we're trying to fill is like, how far did it go? Some of the challenges presented with that are river conditions, right? The river's flowing really high. It's really rapid. There's health and safety challenges to that. We can't see it if the water's turbid. So that presents challenges. So we have to call in experts. We have to do trajectory tracking, which is trying to project, how far the material traveled based on the quantity, based on the chemical properties, the characteristics in the environment that it's in, right? Water versus air, things like that. There's a lot of science behind it. And so we're helping sort of fill in those gaps with our supportive agencies. How we're doing that is, the teams have started to do what we're calling rapid assessments. And so they're going out on boats and things like that and inspecting shorelines. They're inspecting riverbanks and they're looking for product. After we do our initial assessments of like, where are we seeing these globules? Where are we seeing the products? How far out has this stuff moved? They'll come back in and do a more thorough assessment. We're calling it SCAT, which stands for Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Technique. And that is still being defined as far as like what that criteria is gonna look like, but it's gonna be more of a qualitative assessment. Because the chemicals in water don't dissolve, that's good, right? The challenge to that for cleanup is you're gonna have to do more of like a visual assessment. And so, that can take longer, right? It takes more resources, things like that. So there's pros and cons to it, but personally, I'd much rather see that than like, contaminated rivers and things like that. So it's going to be a nuisance, right? Finding these tar balls or globules or whatever you want to call them. And so we're doing our best to prepare information and get that distributed to everybody. If you didn't grab a fact sheet, please do, because there is some information on asphalt material and sulfur and what the impacts would be, what to do when you find it, right? Like as far as, washing your hands, who to call, things like that. So I encourage you, if you didn't grab one of these, please do. So we're trying to get this information out in as many ways as possible. Some of the other things that we're doing with our partners and on the federal side is we're trying to identify sensitive habitats, species, things like that. There'll be a lot of trustees and partner agencies brought in, but we've got to identify culturally sensitive areas, protected areas and lands like tribal lands, for instance. Making sure we understand where sensitive habitats and endangered species might be and things like that. We've got Fish and Wildlife deployed to the scene. for state and for federal. They'll be on site tomorrow. And so we're working with those partners to assess, impacts to wildlife. We're also working, to assess, probably most importantly for a lot of you, like impacts to intakes, right? DEQ's taken the lead on working with like the public water supply agencies, but it's very important that you've got intakes for ag and other uses in your ditches and things like that. And so we're discussing with our teams, like what are some engineering controls that we can do if the cleanup's going to take a long time. You've got crops to cut and you need your water for agriculture and things like that. And so I don't know if we want to discuss that. We can do it in the Q&A session as well. I'm not really prepared to talk about ops as much. That would be Montana Rail, but they're looking at potentially doing like baskets with filters and putting them in front of your head gate so you can open those intakes back up and things like that. And so on a lot of different levels, we're trying to figure out, all the different moving pieces to this cleanup. So what's next? In Unified Command, we've got a large amount of people who are working for us, and we're overseeing the production of plans to be put into action. And those plans include things like recovery plans, cleanup strategies, continuing to monitor sampling and things like that. And so, we'll also have our natural resource agencies come in and do like damage assessments, and that'll go on for a long time. So it won't just stop with cleanup, they'll be looking at the area for a while and ensure that, they understand what's going to happen with like fish population and things like that. So a lot of moving parts, a lot of agencies, and we're here to support you. So it's safe. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Archer. I'm also with the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm what's called a public information officer. So I help develop the fact sheet and get out press releases and all of that public information that we're trying to share. So the next section of the meeting we're going to go into is the question and answer session. We are going to pause for about 5 minutes, give you guys a chance. We're going to ask you to write your question on these little cards because we do have the, Kevin, sorry.
Oh, no, I'm just raising my hand so they know.
Kevin is going to be collecting the cards. Sorry, I thought you had a question. So we're going to ask you to write your questions on the cards, give them to Kevin. Thank you. And then we're going to kind of trade back and forth between folks who have questions in the room, folks who have questions online, so we can answer as many questions as possible. We do have this map up here. It's the same map that's on your fact sheet. So if you want to look at it up here, it's kind of bright, it's kind of bigger. So we have 5 minutes. We're going to ask you to get back into your seats at 7:35 so that we can go into about 15 minutes of questions and answers. These folks, as you heard, have a lot of work they've got to get to. So we want to answer your questions. We want to be heard. The folks like me who are on the public information side, we're going to hang out a little bit after our Unified Command has to get out of here. So that's the next flow. I'll let you come and get your card and anyone with the map. Thank you.
I think we will have some folks over here who might be able to walk you through what's on the map and talk about some of the operations that have taken place. So be about 5 minutes. If you want to get a little walkthrough on the map, you can kind of stand over here towards the basket. I've got cards and pens here. If you'd like to write down a question, you can just use any of this table space to do that. Hand those to me, and then we'll go into our Q&A here. Thank you very much.
organizing, thorough. So we are going to read a question from folks in the room, question from people online. We have about 15 minutes for the questions. We are going to get through as many of them as possible. And I didn't put it on the fact sheet, so I'm kicking myself for it, but EPA does have a website for this response. It's response.epa.gov/stillwater derailment. I think if you Google stillwater derailment EPA, it will come up. So we've been putting information out there daily. So if we're not able to answer the question while we still have our unified command, we're going to be put down. It's about that.
Okay.
So we'll be taking down your questions. We want to answer as many as possible, but if we don't get to you, we're going to be putting that out because we do want to keep pushing out information. This is our first of probably multiple public meetings, so we want to engage with you and give you the information you need. And the last thing that's on the fact sheet that we wanted to mention, if you do see that black material, that asphalt material, we have this place where you can report it on the fact sheet with that email, rpderailment@mprail.com. Please send us emails. It's helpful for us to know. I saw it on my property. It's down here because we are trying to track that material. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin for Q&A.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you all. We've got some good questions. As you imagine, with a group this large, there's a little overlap. You have the same interests and concerns. So I'm not trying to, if I don't read your direct question, my hope is that it was addressed. Our folks here want to make sure that they answer your questions. We're going to stick around a little longer than our initial timeline just to make sure that you can, that we can get that information to you. So we have questions online and here in my hand. If I could ask you all to step in here a little, Shasta, if you can come to the edge here and just kind of line up all kind of against the table there.
This is scary.
This is your chance.
Well, here's the fun part. It's almost like a little game show, right? And these folks you all will need to kind of step up and identify who's going to be best to answer some of these questions. Initial question is, why weren't landowners notified directly, and what is the plan going forward? Also, no one has mentioned any effect on livestock.
I'll take that one on. So realistically, when you look at the time compression that we had, there's no way to possibly try and track down each individual landowners. What we had to focus on was those public use supplies, water use supplies, irrigation supplies, those kind of things. And really, I mean, even today, not today, literally, but it took us a couple days to be able to generate maps. Our situation people currently do have maps that will show every landowner that will be affected from here. I think we went out as far as Park City for right now. And so those folks will be working on who those contacts are, how do we get them notified, especially as these crews come in and start doing this assessment on the banks. They're doing it from the boats now, so the folks that live along the river or whatever probably seen a large amount of boats going up and down the river. Those are our folks doing assessments right now. So as we have the ability to gather that information, kind of assess where we really need to be targeting, then we absolutely reached out in person for that kind of stuff. That hotline or that email that was also just announced, that's an opportunity for you to get directly, send us an email that goes into our PIO shop, and then those folks will forward it up to either to us in command or somebody in the environmental unit to make sure that they're closing the loop on making sure that somebody's out there checking on what's going on. As far as the livestock itself, again, we know, especially your irrigation ditches, that kind of stuff, it doesn't present any more livestock or danger to livestock than it does us, right? It's not dissolving in the water. They're not going to drink that blob that goes floating by. So right now, the water quality is exactly the same as it was before the event happened. That we're picking up on the monitoring anyway and everything. So from a stock perspective, it's not going to have any effect. Just because it's just not dissolving in the water. So, and the sulfur is the same thing.
All right, so we've got a lot of questions. I'm gonna, we want complete answers, but succinct, knowing that might be tough for the chief. So along the same lines, how are local people, residents, property owners, et cetera, near the damage being included in the recovery process?
They all look. Yeah, so it's gonna be the same process, right? If you reach out through that email address, you'll be included. We're gonna probably have done stakeholder meetings, and what those stakeholder meetings were, like the one we just had, would be anybody with irrigation systems, so the ditch users associations are invited to those stakeholder meetings. We'll probably do another public meeting. And again, the best way is probably go through those hotline numbers or that email and get us your contact information, and we'll include you in any information as that cleanup comes along. And again, they'll be reaching out. If they got to get on your property to inspect those riverbanks, they'll be reaching out to you.
And I just want to mention, we're not in the recovery phase yet. We are not there yet. We are still assessing, we are still researching, we are still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. So that hasn't started yet, just to clarify.
All right, what do you anticipate the economic impact to be? People depend on train link travel or rail, et cetera.
Sure. So, I mean, I think it's difficult to assess, to put a number on it. Obviously, we know it's going to impact Montana Rail Link's online customers as well as rail shippers nationally as well. We're working with BNSF and our unions to route traffic around. More of the Great Falls is the line that we're looking to utilize. Other than that, transit times are probably going to increase, right, depending on which direction you want to go as far as destination. So there will be an impact. We don't have a number on that.
Yeah, thank you. Have eyewitnesses been located and questioned?
We are not part of the investigation crew that's working on this. We don't have any of that information.
So the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, and then NTSB, National Transportation Safety Bureau, they both have personnel on site, multiple representatives on site. So they're handling cause investigations. So if there are or were any eyewitnesses, they will identify them.
Are they going to come speak to the community as well?
I don't know the answer to that. I think potentially, if you made a request to them, but I'm not sure that's typical necessarily, but yeah, I'm not sure the answer to that.
We can reach out and ask those federal partners. You bet. This is another question on rerouting trains. What actually happened to the bridge? What caused it to collapse?
So we don't know that yet either. That's actually why FRA and NTSB are here, right? So it's difficult to determine right now. We got to get all the cars out of the river first and then take a look at the pier and understand if it was, a structural failure, if it was a derailment that led to a structural failure. Don't know the answer to that yet.
All right. What measures are being taken to evaluate the infrastructure of other nearby bridges?
So yeah, all of our bridges are inspected. That actually exceed any regulatory requirements. So we do underwater inspections, we do visual inspections. So we're doing that in conjunction with this as well, because obviously that was a concern we had. One of the initial questions was, have all the rain that this area has received, has that caused any scour issues with the piers? No evidence of that we've seen to this point, but we are monitoring that.
All right. Do you have any estimates on when the rail will be back in service?
We don't. I think this is weeks. It's going to take us a while to get this cleaned up, and obviously we have to rebuild the bridge. So that's going to be, we're going to go as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to work 24/7 if possible. Right now, there are some challenges with that with night operations. Want to keep people safe on the site first and foremost. But as soon as we possibly can. But I would expect weeks.
All right, so here's a three-parter. The first one references scouring and it impacts to the bridge foundation. I think you addressed that. The next one is any visual evidence, bridge structure failure, such as corrosion, failing member connections.
So no is the answer to that.
See, of the other derailments this year, what's the number of derailments on rail link track?
This is the second. So we obviously had the derailment near Quinn's, near Paradise, Montana, and then this one.
All right. What steps are being taken to reduce risk of derailments across, they mean across your network. Yeah, I guess you kind of addressed that. But.
Well, and I think we do, we're pretty proud of our safety program. I know that at a time like this, that's a thing that may be difficult to believe, but like I said, we meet or exceed every federal standard. We ultrasonic test our rail minimum of 5 times a year. We have a geometry car come across us a minimum of 2 times a year. We do multiple bridge inspections, tunnel inspections, structure inspections. And so We invest heavily in our capital. We always have. This is a really, really unfortunate incident, but I do think we feel comfortable with our infrastructure.
I'm gonna kick to, actually, let's get Mike with a question real quick. In terms of boating access, has FWP shut down all fishing access and floating access?
We have not. So the current closure is 1 mile above, which essentially is at the tail end of the Cottonwood Fishing Access Site island. So if you're floating, Indian Fort is your stop. If you're non-motorized, if you're motorized, you can be able to get yourself back out. We don't know how that site's going to behave as they're keep pulling it apart. So there's no opportunity to float by or to, portage around that one. So anybody coming down there is going to have to go back up the other direction. So you should have it open. After that, it's 2.5 miles downstream to help facilitate the cleanup and evaluation of what's there, because there's a little bit more material that's visible, at least on the shoreline at this moment. So that's closed for going upstream. So at this point, Holmgren is open and everything downstream on the Yellowstone. There are signs starting up well above, several fishing access sites above, saying it's closed X number of miles downstream. And it'll say your last takeout is right here at Indian Port. So we want to make sure people recognize Indian Port's their takeout if they are non-motorized. So at this point, we are evaluating on the cleanup side what that might look like, since FWP manages essentially all the public boat ramps, down the Yellowstone here. So we're tightly engaged in those discussions at this time. But for now, it's that 1 mile above, 2.5 miles below. They can go to the website and see that. Clearly marked here by the end of tomorrow down on the riverside, but currently marked at the fishing access.
Well, great. And could you introduce yourself for folks who might not know you?
Yeah, I'm Mike Ruggles. I'm the regional supervisor for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks out of the Billings office.
All right,
I have 20 copies of the map with those closures marked, so first 20 people interested. Yeah, there you go.
So maybe to address some of the confusion, early on, the sheriff's office rushed out inappropriately so, not knowing what the material was, and they closed fishing access sites with us working in conjunction with our wardens throughout the Stillwater, ended up being the lower Stillwater and several sites around it above. So we have now constricted to that one piece. So I want to be clear that we've lifted all those others. The water's safe to be in. It's just the area around that work site.
All right, I'm going to kick to my colleague Moira to get a couple of our questions from the online audience.
Great. The first question is, how is the fact sheet going to be distributed outside of this meeting?
So I'm going to stand over here so people on Zoom can see. So Beth Archer, EPA Public Information, we will be uploading that fact sheet to the EPA website, that response.epa Stillwater derailment. So we do have, the website is clunky. I recognize that, but it's the best tool that we have to get information out to you. So we'll be uploading it digitally. There's a document section. You can scroll down. You'll be seeing our daily media. We have 2 daily updates that are going out, the press releases and the stakeholder updates. So they're slightly different formats, but a lot of the same information. And then the fact sheet, this is our first one. I expect we'll have more. That's where you can find them. Thank you.
They'll also be out on the Stillwater County website as well.
Great.
And I believe the leftover fact sheets are going to the county, and they're planning to have those available at the building that houses the county commissioners.
The next question was, what is the impact on recreation such as fishing, access, and floating? I think that's been addressed. The next question says, you mentioned keeping dogs from eating the globules. What about aquatic, macroinvertebrate, and other organisms? What are potential toxic effects with consumption? And then, of course, food chain effects in the ecosystem.
So we're still assessing and researching that. So the benthic, the aquatic insect, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is helping us with those fish analysis. They're going to start some of that research tomorrow. That's all stuff that we're still working on and getting. But I mean, as far as that common sense approach for the everyday person, that applies. Just use your best judgment with this for what we have. We're all familiar with roads, kind of the same material. This is a little stickier, a little globular. Again, sorry, PIOs. So, I mean, especially some of that sealant stuff that they put on, it's just nasty to get on you and it tracks around, but that is stuff that we're researching and looking into. We just don't have those answers yet.
The last question we have online at this time is, what is the largest and smallest size of the globules?
I don't know if we've been accurate. I don't think we've been measuring size. We're just looking for presence absence. When the SCAT team goes out and starts doing that more formal assessment, that is stuff that they will be looking at, is size, location. They'll really dive into what's going on there. Right now, we're just looking, where is it? Where is it collecting? Where is it? And how far is it going down? That's pretty much our initial assessment, that rapid assessment.
And we've seen some of it in kind of a stringy format. Some of it's stuck to like some of the splinters of the railroad tracks. You can pick those up and it'll be kind of stringy. There's some that are balls. There's some that have been more of a mat form. So it's all various kinds of shapes, sizes and whatnot. But again, it's still intact. It's still staying together.
All right, thank you. For EPA, local folks seem comfortable with safety to local area. Why are you trying to control all aspects? And I might ask the chief to follow up Joni's answer and talk about who's in charge.
Yeah, I want to start out by saying it's because it's the law. We have a presidential delegation that says, if there's oil in water and there's a threat to public health and environment, that we shall oversee. I can appreciate local sensitivities and opinions, and we very much take that into like how we set the tone of the response as long as things are going well. I feel like our partners have kind of said in multiple different ways that we're all working really well together, and it is a unified command, and we've all unanimously made decisions together and been on the same page since the beginning. So there's that. So we're definitely not trying to control anything, but you have to realize that, as a public servant and in a position of public trust, it's not just your community that has potential impacts. There are tribes down the river. There are other states that could be impacted, and that's right here. So I very much appreciate that, and I respect you all, and we're definitely not trying to control the response. Thank you.
So, and there's two sides to that. So we just came through a flooding situation where we saw what it looked like sometimes to jump through the hoops of regulation. Sometimes having EPA right here with us cuts through all those hoops. I mean, if you look at what the railroad's been able to do in building a causeway out there, think back a year ago and what that would have looked like to try and do that there. So having somebody on site helps us to racetrack that through and have that ability to do that. And the reality is that there will probably come some times where we absolutely have some disagreements on how it's been handled. But we sit in that unified center and lock the doors and don't come out until we come to some kind of consensus. We haven't had to do that yet, thank goodness, kind of stuff. But that's the purpose for having that, is so that we can get all the sides of it. And at this point, it has truly been across the board. Nobody's wielding any more authority than anybody else. We're sitting down, working through the problems and coming to a consensus on it, which is the way it's supposed to be.
I think it's a good question. I'm kind of going to flip the order here though, but point out that asphalt is not water soluble, but it will deteriorate over time in the sun, etc. What is the approximate time frame for monitoring? Years, months?
We haven't determined that yet. That is something that we will look at with our long-term planning. That will be part of our remediation as this switches from a response effort into a remediation effort. We'll be having people in DEQ looking at that, looking at what we're going to requiring for sampling, looking at when does the state say it's clean? That's what we're going to be looking at and working towards. So that monitoring will continue until we say it's done.
All right. At 30 hours post-accident, we pulled asphalt out of the river 15 miles downstream. So my question is, how far or how fast is the spread of the material spilled in the river? Or how fast is it moving?
So we don't know as far as the gross product is concerned. We're bringing in NOAA to do some trajectory tracking for us, as well as looking into the option of maybe doing some LiDAR surveys, which would be done from an aircraft, and they try to look to see if they can see shadowing and pick up heat transfers, things like that, to try to see where maybe the leading edge would be. But with the turbidity of the river, that's presenting some challenges. And so it's going to take a while to know where, you know, the majority of the product is, we don't expect it to be more than a few miles downstream in gross, right? That's that like large amount that was released. As far as the globules are concerned, I can't say this for certain, but what I have heard some of the assessment teams say is that they did find some globules down about 50 river miles. And I know for sure that we've confirmed, what I can say with certainty is the old Exxon facility, now owned by Par and Billings, had some of that material in their intake. And that's about 52 miles.
I think we had crews that actually loaded down into the Pompey Spiller area and then started working back to try and figure out where this is at. We're still trying to get all of that information to pinpoint where that's at. But again, you know, the water flow, I think that when this thing happened, we were at 20,000 cubic feet per second, which is a pretty significant water flow, you know, which is the same thing that prevented anybody from trying to do any operations or anything like that. So there's no doubt about it that it had the opportunity to spread down.
To remain viscous, or is it just regulating both bottom?
It's doing both of those
We're seeing
things.
both.
I'll remind you all to try to avoid acronyms. NOAA is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
Sorry.
All right, with 3 sulfur cars in the river, can you, EPA, speak to the effects or health risks associated with exposure?
So for sulfur, we did get a document put together with, by our toxicologist, but let me just try to briefly summarize it. So sulfur is an essential element for humans, but anything in large quantities can be harmful to you, including water. So sulfur is low in toxicity to people, but ingesting too much can cause like irritant type factors, right? Like burning sensation, diarrhea, things like that. If animals eat too much sulfur, it could be toxic and fatal, but we are not dealing with large amounts. And you know, we're not seeing it in any of our sample results or anything like that. So we anticipate that if, you know, anything does come up, it's really just going to be more of a nuisance factor. And you know, that's what we do know. Yeah.
Same thing though?
No.
Yeah, actually,
Well,
could you actually
insoluble,
speak to our understanding of what would have happened to that molten sulfur when it entered the river?
So from,
Is it-
so from what I know, it's also, so from what I know about it, it's also insoluble. It's also a sinker. So it does have similar properties to like what we're seeing as far as the asphalt is concerned. You know, it is yellow. There's a little bit of a smell when it's like the dust comes off when we're moving the cars around. What I can tell you though is it's not known to be carcinogenic, which means like cancer causing. It's more of an irritant and things like that. We do have an EPA OSC up here that has a chemist background. Did I miss anything, Paul, or is there anything to add to that?
It's not a primary drinking water standard. Considered divided up into cubes that provide regulated drinking water. Its behavior in water, that actually is set up like, actually sewers blocked by the here in the middle one. It was set up like a big app. It was set up at a large solid formation. Very, very little size, you got another say 80 degrees. So March, 5 to 60s. That stuff is less old than the asphalt that's in there.
Sure.
Doesn't have additional toxicity. The irritants are always high because the actions of the air. You have to have lots of it.
So we haven't seen it break up in the water. I would say both of those chemicals can off gas, like in the heat and in an out, and you know, in a different environment, so like outdoor. But given the fact that, you know, it's highly diluted, right? You're not in an enclosed space. It's not a really large amount. You're not in a confined space. We wouldn't expect you to have any sort of effects whatsoever. As a matter of fact, EPA has done air monitoring as well as Montana Rail's contractor, and we haven't seen any sort of even detections with our air monitoring that monitored down to like parts per million.
Sorry, we're gonna say anything?
No, well, hold on just a moment to summarize for our folks online who aren't going to be able to hear Paul back there. To briefly summarize, Paul pointed out that there's not a primary drinking water standard for sulfur. That would mean that, you know, your local water supply isn't even regulated or required to test. I mean, that's my understanding. Is that right, Paul? And then he also pointed out with his chemistry background that it's going to be pretty solid once it cools off and is in the river. So it's not going to be very mobile. Did I get that right also, Paul, for a summary? Thank you.
So the off-gas smell is interesting. The reason that you can smell natural gas is that we actually go to the coast that we're capturing soil compound. You smell like apartment food levels, but it's not toxic. That way it warns you that the gas thing is happening without actually really helping things. The odor that's breathed in the property, you typically use that for warning natural gas situations. Steve uses reminders all the time as well.
All right, I'm going to try and summarize Paul again. I'm glad this isn't my full-time job like it was Beth's. He pointed out that natural gas has sulfur added to provide some smell so that because it's otherwise you can't smell it, and because it's not toxic, but it's got a distinct smell. Did I get that roughly right, Paul? Thank you. All right. This question was, what does molten sulfur do when it hits the river? We kind of just addressed that. And does it or asphalt float?
Yeah, the asphalt's flowing, we're saying that, and that's that. And how it was described, some of this stuff that we're finding is that, yeah, remember this stuff was heated in those tanks, so it comes out of that tank, it hits the cold water. So they've actually found some that has kind of congealed around the outside and then has still been kind of fluid in the inside. So it did that immediate crusting when it hit the water. But when it does that, then it also adds some buoyancy to it, you know, because it's capturing some air. And that's why you're seeing some of that stuff float down. What's that?
October and November, you'll probably find something.
Exactly, yeah, kind of stuff. So, yeah, it is, the asphalt's floating, the sulfur for the most part, I don't think we're seeing it move at all.
I haven't seen it at all.
All right. Is there previous experience cleaning up these types of products, asphalt, molten sulfur?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, I can just speak from EPA's perspective, like we unfortunately see accidents happen, like tanker trucks, you know, carrying asphalt, things like that, you know, who have rollovers or turnovers in the river. And so, yeah, we've seen cleanups like this. So it's not like it's unheard of by any means, but we don't like to see it. And hopefully it doesn't happen very often in this area or ever again. Yeah.
It does have half-life.
So the half-life, I can't speak to that. I'm not a chemist, but what we can do is try to gather some more information and publish it like in the form of a fact sheet or something. We can take that back, but I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to answer that question.
Sir, did you also have a question?
No,
Oh, okay.
I'm intimately acquainted with the cleanup of the Exxon Valley East. That was in 1989. They're still finding new crud.
Yeah, you're right.
Sand.
You're right.
We're gonna get rid of all. And when the water goes down, it flows up. This is compared to that.
This is another question about the sulfur that we just addressed. All right, can you provide us with a list of everything, you know, the chemicals that you are testing the water for?
Okay, so we're testing the water for sulfur. We're also testing the water for petroleum products. So we're testing for EPH, extractable petroleum hydrocarbons. Those are those longer end hydrocarbon chains. We're testing for VPH, which is volatile petroleum hydrocarbons. That's what the state of Montana uses for our risk-based screening levels and our water quality standards. So we're doing those. We've also added PAHs, which is another petroleum test. It's for longer, heavier as well. It's similar. It gives us a little bit more information when we get that data back. And then we've done a round of sampling. We haven't gotten the results back for a lot of the lighter ends. So SVOCs, And then there's a couple other ones. We tried to grab every petroleum constituent we could that the lab could turn around for us here in Billings, and just threw sampling at it. We've been consistently monitoring for sulfur, EPH, VPH, and pH in the water every day. But we're doing additional sampling just to get that data and that information so we can determine more of that sampling plan and update that based on those results.
While EPA is on site, we will be posting those sample results on our website to share with you all, with anybody, just as out of transparency.
All right, here's another question about how far is the product moved. And our last question here is one I think that is on everyone's mind. What or how do you clean up the asphalt?
That plan is very much still being developed. As I mentioned, and Shasta's mentioned, I think everybody said that we're still in the assessment phase. And so, we're just not to recovery yet. And based on like what that shoreline cleanup assessment technique survey shows, like how much are we dealing with, those determinations as far as like, are we going to cause more damage to, the environment by like going in and you're not going to want to, potentially go in and dredge up a river bottom for like maybe a few pieces of asphalt, things like that. So it's going to take a little while for like those sort of assessments and evaluations to be made. But we're not just going in very aggressively and uneducated to try to formulate a plan. So that's why we're still coming up with that plan.
In the meantime, what are we doing to mitigate on that? Because it's rolling on the bottom of it. I fished Sunday, 30 hours after the my friend's son got a big-time ball of it. The sticks off the bottom. Then my friend caught one and I caught one. When it comes into contact with the air, it does not stay solid.
Yep. Sure.
It becomes a liquid.
Sure.
And
But,
it's
yeah.
usually probably get it out of the water.
Yeah. I'll tell you, we are struggling.
To our irrigation towers, that thing done.
Yeah.
So are these guys putting screens on every irrigation canal from here to North Dakota?
So screening has issues, from what I've been told. I know that they're evaluating engineering controls. It is a nuisance. It's definitely going to be a nuisance factor. That's why we're, right now, I think the team has came up with, strategies to, provide a resource for if you see it, so we can come out and evaluate it and try to recover it as soon as possible. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, I mean.
Well, honestly, we can't stop it. The river flows right now are so much that there's no way to go that.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we're going to assess the problem. The river goes there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no doubt it's on the bottom, it's floating on top. Yeah, and like I said, we've been in contact with a lot of the irrigation users, a lot of them, at least on the quick initial end of things, got the gate shut down. We know we're dealing with one that wasn't able to get that shut down. And that's one of the things that we're talking about from the environmental side of things. These guys are gonna need water probably a couple weeks. I think we've never quit raining and get their hay back or anything like that. So those guys are looking at, what ways can we mitigate, like the narrow ditch right now, they did boom across that, especially while we were pulling some cars this afternoon because of that side channel, they could do it. But the water flow in the main channel is just no way to move across that. Looking at each one of those individual head gates is gonna be way easier, and we could call it easier, to look at that and try to mitigate the water that's going into that. But, like you said, it comes with it's a double-edged sword because you're gonna interrupt that flow into that, get those filters in there. But we'll have to do the best they can.
They're working as fast as they can.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, when do we expect to get all the cars out of the river? I mean,
Yeah, as quickly as possible. That's our hope. There's 6 left. It's just, it's difficult conditions. There's a lot of initial construction to.
Thinking about one a day to get.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit variable. Yeah, we took 2 yesterday, only took 1 today, got shut down by lightning this afternoon. We were actually in the process of pulling another one and got shut down by lightning this afternoon. And so yeah, site conditions are a little bit challenging.
And the challenge with that too is they've got a river, or they got a bridge trestle that's intermixed with all of those cars. And if you see some of the damage done on those cars, they took pretty hard hit, so they're pretty well intertwined. This is a king size jig and mess that these guys are trying to deal with, pull the cars out, plus get around the trussels, not damage the cars anymore by pulling them across broken trussels, this and that. So they're spending a lot of time really looking at which part do we take out first to not create more hazard as we go along. So,
Yeah, so just to add on to that, Rich, so we actually brought in the dive team I mentioned. They're actually certified in underwater torch cutting as well. And so when we get to the point where we take everything that we can see on the surface, then it's below the water level, we're gonna have to make an assessment of what can you pull, and is there torch cutting necessary for that? So we have that expertise on site as well.
Okay, so you folks aren't quite off the hook yet. We've got 2 additional questions from our online audience.
Who is responsible for inspections to the bridge?
Montana Railway.
Montana Railway, okay. Are the materials that were in the train typical materials that cross the bridge on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of those commodities actually came out of our online shippers in the Billings Laurel area. Typical commodities that they cross us every day. So one thing that people may not realize is we, as a railroad, we have a common carrier obligation pursuant to federal law. So we have to haul what is offered to us in reasonable carriage. And so we don't have the ability to decline certain commodities. So we take basically what is shipped across us. And these would be commodities that would be typical of that nature.
I will thank you. So we're gonna, very quickly, sir.
When was the bridge built?
Originally 1917. And then
Got a lot of flex.
it's obviously undergone major capital upgrades for the last 120-ish years.
All right, folks, we're gonna have to let these folks go. They've been on site since 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and their day is not done yet. They're working hard, long days to work on this. I want to thank the folks at Columbus High School. They've been fantastic in letting us use their space today. The folks with the county were really helped us out in getting this all set up. I want to thank you all for coming. And with that, if you've got some additional questions or you had some follow-up on what you heard here in these answers, come and talk to these 2 here. They can get some information and make sure.
Thanks, y'all.